Welcome everyone. My name's Alan Monaghan, your moderator for this webinar. I just wanted to welcome you all here today. To kick us off for an introduction, can I please introduce to you Elvira Luther. Elvira is a program manager with Austria's Climate and Energy Fund, and of course the mission director of the Net Zero Industries mission. Please, Elvira.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. I hope you can hear me. Yes. I give a very short introduction on the Net Zero Industry Mission and on our webinar series, the Net Zero Industry Mission Industry Insight. So the mission was founded in September 2022, and it's a global coalition of 9 countries, Australia and Austria's co-leads, and we cooperate with Canada, China, Finland, Germany, the Republic of South Korea, and the United Kingdom and the United States, together with the European Commission, and we have 15 key mission sponsors and partners like UNIDO, IEA, and institutions represented today in this workshop like ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, HILCRC or Worley. The goal of our mission is to support by 2030 the implementation across the world of at least 50 large-scale demonstration projects, which are funded by our member countries and or implemented by industry and accompanied by our key mission sponsors and partners, to fast-track the development of breakthrough technologies, the so-called white spots towards net zero industry in 2050, to TL8 for demonstration after 2030, and to reduce the capital expenditure. And I didn't share my slides, sorry. Yeah, no, I showed my slide. Yes, to reduce the capital expenditures by 15%. Dissemination and networking, for example, to spread information about success stories and bring together new cooperation partners from industry research is key in order to reach the goals of this mission. And for this reason, we start the NIM Industry Insight. Today is the first time, this webinar, and we are very thankful to our Australian colleagues to give insight to Australia's coordinated efforts supporting international knowledge sharing to advance industrial decarbonization. The goal of the webinar series is to transfer deeper knowledge and experience on technical and non-technical issues in order to achieve net zero in the energy-intensive industry on a global scale, to learn from each other, both from different countries, industry, technology providers, and research. And the topics of the webinars can be different. It can be technology pathways. It could be a sector focus or a country focus like we have it today. In total, we want to have 5 to 6 webinars each year. And now I've told enough about the mission and the webinar. And I want to thank all the speakers for taking time to give us an insight into your activities today, to all the participants for your interest, and to our colleagues in Australia and Austria for organizing this event. And now I hand over to you, Alan, again to guide us through this first webinar on Australia's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvira. And again, just to reiterate that, welcome everyone to what is the inaugural Industry Insights webinar. We have 6 distinguished speakers in the webinar today, spanning government, research, and of course their collaboration with industry. That is in itself a microcosm of stakeholders that are critical to achieving the goals of the Net Zero Industry Mission. As we progress through each of our speakers, can I ask you each to please put your questions into the chat field, clearly identifying if there's a particular presenter or speaker that you wish to aim that question to. What we will do is we'll actually hold those questions to the end of all of the speakers to give them a break after each of their sessions, and we'll address as many of those questions as we can in a designated block of a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our very first speaker, Niall Jacobson. Niall is the Assistant Director for Global Energy Security, Innovation and Transitions at the Australian Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. He's focused on establishing connections with researchers and industry, developing innovative clean energy solutions, and the Australian engagement through both mission innovation and the clean energy ministerial programs. Niall, over to you. Please share your screen.
Thanks, Alan. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see it. And I do recognise that it is a little bit small. It's got to do with the display. I apologise. There's nothing I can do to fix it. But good morning, good afternoon and evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the Net Zero Industries Mission for organising this webinar and for inviting me to present on Australia's climate and energy policies and programs to support industrial decarbonisation. Next slide. So in Australia, it's customary to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today. And so I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional owners of the land where I'm located this evening. To begin, I'd like to touch briefly on Australia's climate and clean energy ambitions. So in 2022, the Australian government legislated emissions reduction targets of 43% below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Providing policy and investment certainty and government accountability. The Australian government has also set a target for 82% renewable electricity by 2030 and has ambitions for Australia to become a renewable energy superpower, and I'll touch on both in more detail in some later slides. Now, to help achieve these targets and ambitions, we have several key objectives. These include decarbonising key sectors such as energy and industry, supporting innovation, scientific research and technology development to enable the transition to net zero, and supporting greater community benefits and participation opportunities, including for First Nations people. So at a high level, in thinking about how we're planning for and guiding Australia's transition to net zero by 2050, the government is developing a net zero plan, which will articulate how we will transition to a net zero economy consistent with our international and domestic commitments. This plan will focus on maximising the benefits of the global transition to net zero and providing long-term policy certainty to drive investment and longevity in new industries. This will be supported by 6 sectoral emissions reduction plans, which will each outline how key economic sectors, so electricity and energy, resources, the built environment, agriculture and land, industry, transport and infrastructure will contribute to the transition while managing trade-offs and opportunities. The net zero plan itself will bring together these sectoral plans to reach net zero and support our ambition for a future made in Australia. The net zero plan will reflect the importance of cross-cutting issues that are critical to successfully reaching net zero, including skills and workforce and regional opportunities. Now focusing a little bit more on Australia's energy transformation. So in Australia, the electricity sector is our single largest emission source, and the government is focused on transforming the sector to meet our 82% renewable electricity by 2030 target. We also know that transforming the electricity sector is key to decarbonising our energy-intensive industrial sector, which is fundamental for reaching net zero. Now, to do this, the government is investing billions of dollars to upgrade, expand and modernise our energy system to unlock a greater penetration of renewables, accelerate decarbonisation of the grid and bring down electricity prices for households and businesses. Key policies include expanding the capacity investment scheme to target a total of 32 gigawatts of new storage capacity by 2030 and unlocking investment in our electricity grid with Rewiring the Nation, which is a $20 billion investment in modernising and upgrading transmission infrastructure. When it comes to decarbonising our industrial sector, the government's focused on ensuring the industry plays its part and remains competitive in a decarbonising global economy. In addition to the industry decarbonisation sectoral plan, which I mentioned earlier, which will plot a course for the sector to reach net zero, the Australian government has in recent years put in place several mechanisms to reduce emissions. So in 2023, the government reformed what's called the safeguard mechanism to provide certainty to investors, ensure Australian industries remain competitive in a decarbonising world and help Australia meet its climate targets. For those outside Australia, this scheme places emissions limits, known as baselines, on industrial facilities that emit more than 100,000 tonnes of Scope 1 CO2 equivalent emissions per year, and aim to put Australia's largest industrial emitters on a pathway to net zero by 2050. We're also supporting industrial decarbonisation in regional Australia through the Powering the Regions Fund, which will support trade-exposed facilities covered by the safeguarding mechanism to reduce emissions. It will support existing industrial facilities and new clean energy developments in regional areas to reduce their emissions in line with our 2030 targets and in support of reaching net zero by 2050. It will also support domestic manufacturing capability of industries that produce inputs, for example, primary steel production, cement and lime, alumina and aluminium, that are essential to the development of Australia's clean energy industries. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Australian government has an ambition for Australia to become a renewable energy superpower and is committed to supporting the development of new low emissions industries and the decarbonisation of traditional ones. Australia's well positioned to become a world leader in the net zero transformation with abundant and high quality renewable energy potential, a skilled and innovative workforce, strong trading relationships and mineral resources. We know that domestic decarbonisation efforts are important, but pale in comparison to the global emissions reductions if we can find ways to export our renewable energy and renewable energy embedded products to countries without abundant renewable resources. Doing so will not only underpin our ongoing role as a reliable energy supplier to the world, but also provide a significant contribution to cutting global emissions. In terms of the actions the government is taking to help make Australia become a renewable energy superpower, key to this is the government's recent announcement that it is investing almost 23 billion Australian dollars over the next decade to build a future made in Australia. This plan is about powering Australia with cheaper, cleaner, more reliable energy, unlocking investment in net zero industries and jobs, boosting demand for Australia's green exports, and realising the opportunities of the net zero transformation. The Future Made in Australia plan focuses on sectors where Australia has a comparative advantage and which contribute to decarbonisation or supply chain resilience, including renewable hydrogen and green metals, specifically iron, steel, alumina and aluminium. Now, under this plan, the government is committed to supporting the commercialisation of technologies that are critical to net zero, including by establishing a $1.7 billion Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund and delivering a 10-year extension of funding to the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. Now, under the plan, the government have also committed significant additional funding to support green metals, including iron, steel, alumina and aluminium, supercharge the renewable hydrogen industry, build Australia's capabilities in refining and processing of critical minerals, and provide targeted support for clean energy technology manufacturing. Now, my last slide, but definitely not least, the government recognises that when it comes to realising these ambitions, we aren't the only decision makers. So we're making sure that through this transformation, workers, communities and regions remain front of mind. So a key element of this is through the creation of a new net zero economy authority to ensure the workers, industries and communities, including First Nations groups and regional communities, can realise and seize the opportunities of Australia's net zero transformation. We also recognise that First Nations people who have strong local and cultural knowledge should inform how Australia transforms its energy systems to achieve net zero, which is why we're also developing a First Nations clean energy strategy to embed First Nations voices and knowledge into the planning and execution of future clean energy policies and projects. Now that's all from me. I think I've come in under time. Thanks everyone for listening, and Alan, I will pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Niall. As I said, if anyone has a question for any of our speakers, if you could just put them into the chat, please, and we will do a wrap up of those speakers at the end of the session. But passing on from Niall, our next speaker tonight is Kate O'Callaghan. Kate, your camera's on. Excellent. Kate is the Director of Knowledge Sharing at ARENA, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, was just mentioned in Niall's presentation, where she has a focus on distributed energy resource projects. Please, everyone, welcome Kate O'Callaghan. Kate, if you could share your screen.
Brilliant, will do. And thank you very much for having me here. I'm really excited to hear all the presentations today and about the webinar series upcoming as well. Be great to hear from some of the other countries too. Okay, let's see if I can get this going. How are we looking, Alan?
Perfect, absolutely perfect.
Excellent. So I think Niall's done a fantastic introduction of the big picture, Australia's big ambitions, some of the really significant funding and policies that were put in place. We're going to zoom in a little bit to ARENA as a smaller energy agency really focused on innovation and tell you a little bit about that. As Alan said, I am the Director of Knowledge Sharing here at ARENA. So while I'm not the holder of all of ARENA's knowledge, I do spend a lot of time thinking about how we create a really strong knowledge ecosystem from the projects that we fund. And that's really where I'm going to focus a bit of time today. Time is limited, so my hope is that you'll leave here with a general understanding of what we do at ARENA and kind of learn a bit more about that, and that you're equipped with some tools and information that allow you to further explore some of the innovative projects that we're investing in. Before I get started, I did want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where I'm coming to you from today. That's the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respect to elders past and present. I think it's a good space to pause and recognise that they've got tens of thousands of years of connection and care for land and sea country. And I think First Nations communities around the world, we have a lot to learn from them when it comes to sustainability. So giving you a little bit of background about ARENA and our mission. So I think Niall said it really well. He set the big picture. And then zooming into ARENA, our mission is to support the global transition to net zero emissions by accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation to the benefit of Australia. So the crux of this is we're really looking to decarbonise and reach net zero, and we're looking at it through the lens of innovation. We see ourselves as having two main levers for impact. One of those levers is funding. So we're a grants organisation. We co-fund projects with private sector partners, and our funding helps to get projects off the ground that are pre-commercial. So they're a little bit too risky for a bank or somebody looking for a financial return on investment to invest in yet, but they've got a commercial pathway in the future, and we're here to get them off the ground and help kind of prove them up and get them on that journey. So that's lever number one, funding. And lever number two for impact is knowledge sharing, and that's really what I'm going to focus on a fair bit today. So we consider knowledge is our return on investment, right? So we're investing in projects that aren't commercial yet, but we're getting a return through the knowledge, and we've set up a system whereby we're getting knowledge out of these projects and getting it out to industry decision makers so that we can accelerate the shift to renewable energy. So I'm going to talk a fair bit about our, I guess, ecosystem for doing that. So what do we invest in? Is this moving forward? There we go. Wonderful. What kinds of projects do we invest in? Well, we've got these 4 strategic priorities, and this is where we're focusing most of our investments at the moment. These priorities are, I mean, when you look at them, they're all highly interlinked, right? So underneath the renewable electricity piece, we're focusing in on ultra low cost solar, and that's absolutely essential to have ultra low cost solar generation so that we can commercialize renewable hydrogen, so that we can support the transition to low emissions metals. So these are all like super interlinked. In terms of industrial decarbonisation, I think obviously the low emissions metals is a big industry in Australia. We're zooming in on alumina, iron and steel industries because these are really emissions intensive industries in Australia. So the size of the emissions prize is really big if we can help to decarbonise those. But we've also got, outside of these priorities, government has entrusted us with additional funding to help with industry decarbonisation decarbonisation. So some of those programs that Niall was talking about earlier, and we're really excited to get those off the ground. So we're going to move on to, here we go, a knowledge sharing function, which obviously as the Director of Knowledge Sharing, I love to talk about why it's important to us. I think it's probably important to note, so ARENA's been around since 2012. We were established through legislation, which is a bit unique, and that gives us our mandate and it defines our functions. And one of the things that's really unique about ARENA and our legislation is that we've got this wonderful section in that compels us to share knowledge and creates knowledge sharing as part of our mandate. And that's really why it's very important to us. In terms of how we do knowledge sharing, we've really evolved that over time. So I kind of wanted to get into that a little bit more today. My team focuses on sharing knowledge targeted to energy sector decision makers so they can make more informed choices about their next development or investment or policy or regulation, depending on who we're targeting. So what does our knowledge sharing approach look like in practice? Well, it starts at the project level. So I've been talking a little bit about projects and all of these different projects that we invest in. We've got about 200 active projects at the moment, and there's a slice of those that focus on industry decarbonisation. I'll give you a little bit of a taste of that later. For each project that we invest in, we have a funding agreement with them, and within that we develop a knowledge sharing plan, and that's a really important document for us. It's our agreement between us and our industry funding recipients, and it kind of talks about like what knowledge we want to learn from a project, who our target audiences are, and of course what they're going to deliver throughout the life of the project. So this might be reports, it might be presentations, it might be site visits. But I think one thing that's really key about this system is that we're making sure that the projects are obligated to share knowledge throughout the life of the project rather than waiting till the end for it all to be wrapped up. These can be projects that go over many years. The sector is moving really fast, so we think it's really important that we're sharing knowledge as we learn it. And that's a really kind of key part of what we're doing. Another thing that's really key here is that we're dealing with projects that are moving towards a pathway to commerciality. So it's really important that we're getting a good balance of making sure those projects are protecting their IP, but also sharing knowledge. So I'll go through where you can access some of this public knowledge. We aim to get as much of it public as possible. So that's the project level, and you can imagine when you've got 200 projects, 200 knowledge sharing plans, deliverables throughout the life of the project, there's a lot of knowledge coming out of this cohort of projects. So what do we do with that? We look at it at a portfolio level, and that's where my team kind of comes in. We could just leave it at putting out the project knowledge because they produce fantastic knowledge, but we think it's really important to gather those insights, lessons, and people from across the portfolios to document and exchange information and really kind of get into it at a bigger level. So what are we doing? What does that kind of mean? It means my team is pulling together reports and studies that bring together information from across multiple projects and putting that out into the world. We're doing things like delivering industry workshops, roundtables and forums to kind of, I guess, hash out key issues and figure things out that we're discovering from our projects that are tricky and interesting and need some more, I guess, brains in the room to talk through. And we're doing things like public webinars and events. And you don't have to be Australian to be able to access webinars and events. So I want to give you a little more information about how we get that stuff out there. But before I do that, let me tell you about 2 industrial decarbonisation examples and where you can find some more info. So I'll take you over to the lab first. Starting in the lab because we think research and development is a really key component to unlocking lower cost renewable hydrogen and low emissions metals. So just recently, we've invested over $59 million across 17 R&D projects in hydrogen, iron and steel. And a real key focus of those projects excuse me, is commercialization and how we can support these projects to develop up commercialization plans, connect in with industry partners, and eventually get out of the lab and into real world applications. It's a really exciting cohort of projects, and we've already got some good knowledge coming out of them, even though they've just been announced, and we'll see lots more over the coming years. These recipients will produce a bunch of different reports throughout the life of their project, which you'll be able to access on ARENA's website. And in addition to that, we'll support some of those portfolio level initiatives throughout the life of these projects as well. We've just had a kickoff event with the funding recipients, which kind of brought them all together and some potential commercialization partners to support peer-to-peer learning and develop networks. And we feel like that is a really important part of what we do, is helping our projects to connect and learn from each other and facilitating those outside connections as well. So second example, we'll hop out of the lab and talk about Highgate initiative. So this is intended to support real world pilot, trial and demonstration projects along the hydrogen supply chain and to facilitate collaboration between Australian and German partners. So a really exciting and kind of different initiative for ARENA that's on foot at the moment. Australia and Germany have respectively committed 50 million Australian dollars and 50 million euro to establish this Highgate initiative. Round one has funded, I think, 5 projects. So some really great projects being funded there. A 10 megawatt electrolyzer producing green hydrogen for solar methanol production is one of them. And a few others that are really exciting demonstration projects that are going to show some real on the ground things. There are many, many more projects tackling different aspects of industrial decarbonisation, far too many for me to kind of go through today, although I'd love to. So I thought I might just end on 4 ways that you can get across the knowledge from our innovative projects now that you know more about ARENA and what we do. I've put 5 ways on the title. Interesting. I have a mystery way that I might let you know about. So obviously ARENA's website, that's really a given, but I really wanted to shout it out because for every project that we invest in now and in the past, every single project, you've got a project page on there with a profile describing it, all of the knowledge that they've produced. And you've also got things like our funding opportunities and our investment prospectus and what we're funding in next. So it's a really good source to go to. The knowledge bank is something that I can't stop talking about. It's a catalogue of all of ARENA's knowledge sharing. So reports, webinar recordings, event summaries, they're all there on the knowledge bank, and this QR code will send it around these slides afterward. This QR code will take you to the knowledge bank, where you can also sign up to our ARENA Insights newsletter. This is a really good thing to do. It's a short monthly publication. We don't spam you, but we do give you a monthly wrap of all of the new knowledge coming out of ARENA. So I think it's a fantastic resource to just keep in touch with what we're up to. And if any of this has sparked some more specific questions for ARENA, please do feel free to contact us directly, knowledge@arena.gov.au, and I can connect you in with some of our experts in the area to give you more information. But that is the whirlwind tour of ARENA and our knowledge ecosystem, and I hope that's been really helpful for you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kate. I don't think it'd be a surprise to anyone sort of close to the work of the mission to see the enormous synergies between the work of ARENA and what we have as ambitions for mission innovation net zero industries. I'll just clarify one thing for the audience, for our international audience. While the projects are chosen for the benefit of Australia, the knowledge is shared with the world. And one of the ambitions of Mission Innovation is to help promote the good quality of information that's there, not just from ARENA's program, but from global programs of all of our member states to be able to share them with the world. So thank you so much, Kate. Next speaker on our presentation, and I do know there are questions in the chat or in the question and A session. We will come back to those at the end. Our next speaker is Jenny Selway. Jenny is the CEO of the HILT CRC, and that's a cooperative research centre. here in Australia that brings industry, universities and government organisations together to identify and de-risk decarbonisation pathways for heavy industry. It's great to have you here, Jenny, so please, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Alan, and I trust my screen has popped up there.
Absolutely perfect.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. So as Alan said, I am the CEO of HILT CRC, which stands for Heavy Industry Low Carbon Transition Cooperative Research Centre, which is a little bit of a mouthful. And we focus on the decarbonisation of iron ore, steel, alumina and cement. So CRCs are independent, not-for-profit organisations that exist in Australia under Commonwealth grants from the Australian government. So we're half funded by the Australian government and half funded by industry and research organisations. There's 27 of these CRCs in Australia, and as Marcus may have caught, Marcus, who will be speaking later, mentioned at the very start of this webinar, 13 of those CRCs are working together on decarbonisation topics, and that link that I put in the chat is a recent report that outlines all of that work that collectively CRCs are doing. But today I'll focus on the work that HILT CRC is doing as part of that. So we have a $40 million grant from the Australian government, and that's matched with industry and research funding to decarbonise these hard to abate sectors. So when you think about iron ore and steel and cement and concrete and aluminium, and I think everyone knows these are some of the hard to abate sectors, and on a worldwide scale, they contribute for about 20% of emissions. And Australia is only about 1% of global emissions. But when we think about our resources, we're actually supplying 40% of the world's iron ore, and we're supplying 25% of the world's bauxite, and we're also the leading exporter of alumina. And together, when those resources are processed into steel and aluminium around the world, collectively that's actually contributing 3% of global emissions. So it's 3 times what our Australian domestic contribution is. So by decarbonising these industries and also really crucially making sure that our Australian ores are suitable for green steel and green aluminium processes, we're really able to have a much larger impact on global emissions than we can when we just focus on what Australia contributes ourselves. And as Niles pointed out, we've also got these amazing renewable energy resources. So there's a huge opportunity for Australia, as well as decarbonising globally, also to protect our own economy and grow jobs here and really do our bit for the world. So that's what HILT's focused on. And all of the policies and frameworks that Niles talked about also feeds into all of that work that we're doing. So the sectoral plans for heavy industry, the Future Made in Australia and the safeguard mechanism that Niles talked about is all related to the work that we're doing, as well as the ARENA funding that we just heard from Kate. So it all fits together quite nicely. So at HILT CRC, we've got over 55 partners, which I'll show on the next slide. And we're located, tends to be in sort of industrial hubs around Australia, but also internationally. So we've got some of the largest universities in Australia, as well as some of the largest companies. And then internationally, we've got 12 organisations shown on here that partner with us. This slide is actually a little bit out of date. We're up to 15 international partners at the moment, including some of the core and key partners in HILT who are based in Brazil and Italy and the UAE. But also importantly, the reason why HILT is so tied into the Net Zero Industries mission is that HILT has the government grant from DECA, which is from DECU, which is Niles' department, to actually facilitate Australia's co-leadership of the Net Zero Industries mission with Austria. So we're very tied into the Net Zero Industries mission, and this link to the NIM has been so useful for us to make sure that our knowledge is shared globally, but also to build the relationships and ties with all of those organisations listed there globally and more, and make sure that all of that knowledge is also shared back to Australia. So it's very in line with all of the knowledge sharing work that that Kate just talked about. These here are our partners. We actually have 55 at the moment, and there's a few more who we're waiting to sign on shortly. So we'll be soon up to almost 60 partners, which is really exciting. They tend to be arranged in 4 categories. So the big iron ore, steel, alumina and cement producers We've got Roy Hill, who's one of our core partners, and we'll be hearing from Brian McDonald shortly. Brian's our steering committee chair, and so really a huge part of HILT. As well as other iron ore producers, we've got Grange Resources, who are based in Tasmania, who are an iron ore pellet and steel company, Liberty and BlueScope, two of the other domestic steel companies, as well as South 32, Hydro and EGA, who I also already mentioned, Rio Tinto, Magnetite Mines and Adbri, as well as leading research institutions, both domestically and internationally. Also a lot of technology providers who are providing specialist skill sets to our research projects, and governments and industry associations, both state and federal governments in Australia, and all of the industry associations as well. And as well as Standards Australia, who are very key in order to make sure that innovations can actually be adopted in industry. So aside from doing this world quality research that I'll cover in a second, we're also striving to foster this collaborative ecosystem, which we really recognise has value in and of itself. So we run a number of events. I'm speaking at conferences. I'm always doing outreach to try to bring people together and foster these conversations. So some of those will be regional specific. So in specific areas of South Australia or Western Australia where we have industry located, and bringing people together to have conversations about topics of interest and really that are action focused. Some of them are also focused industry-wide. So at a recent conference in Dubai, we hosted a decarbonisation workshop at the end of that, which was open to everyone who attended, not just for HILT partners, which was very action-oriented with a number of research projects that stemmed out of that can be followed on. And also just networking events. So this photograph here on the top right are all the participants in a particular project that we have underway, focusing on alumina production, and just bringing people together and fostering those relationships is really important. So why were these industries brought together under HILT? We recognise that all three sectors have a commonality of high temperature processing. And actually our research director had started bringing people together for a particular forum called High Temp that has been running for 8 years, which was really the precursor to HILT, because he recognised that because of this commonality with high temperature processing, there's a lot of research that can be done for one sector that's of value to another sector, and so that knowledge can be shared and leveraged and done more efficiently if it's done cooperatively. So if you take a look on this slide, the raw products are on the left in the dark blue, moving to decarbonised products on the right-hand side, and they all go through a specific process, which is the grey boxes. Anything to do with the grey boxes forms part of our processing technology research program, which are very sort of specific to the sector. But if you look at all of the arrows going everywhere, that's showing all of the linkages between the sectors. So there's a commonality of needing net zero energy or fuels. Byproducts from one sector can be used as inputs for another. There's also the potential use of CCUS for all of them. So all of these commonalities and the potential circularity between the industries, any research towards those topics forms part of our cross-cutting technologies. And that really increasingly is energy related, because what we hear from our industry partners is that access to green electrons and green hydrogen is hugely important and potentially one of the most significant barriers to decarbonising heavy industry. But technical projects and progress isn't enough. So we also have our third program, Facilitating Transformation, which is everything you can see at the top of this diagram: policy, regulatory, supply chain and social licence, development of green markets and green certification. It's everything that isn't technical, but is also a huge barrier and also a huge enabler to decarbonisation. So that forms part of our third research program, Facilitating Transformation. And having these three together, sort of working synergistically, is hugely important. And also we've got a very wide breadth of partners, and some partners will be interested in all three programs. Some partners will be interested in just one program. It's very up to each individual partner where they want to lean into and how involved they want to get. And we find that model really helps widen our appeal and our reach as well. So all CRCs only exist for a short time frame. HILT's got funding for 10 years, which is a feature of the CRC to make sure that we're agile and moving quickly and really achieve our milestones and goals within that time frame. We're 3 years in now. We've completed a number of quick start projects which mapped out where we wanted our research to go for the next 3.5 years. So we're in this second phase now, which we've almost mapped out all of those projects out to 2027. And then from 2027 onwards, we see a real need for a network of R&D facilities that we think HILT can play a role in coordinating, whether that be for different iron ore or alumina or cement related techniques. And this will be at different scales, some at universities, some significant pilots and some demonstration scales. So HILT's not funded to do this ourselves. We'll be working with ARENA and the other government bodies that we've already talked about to try to pull this all together and map out what makes sense. But what's really important is that it's done in a coordinated way. So you're not having 5 people build the same demonstration plant, and that also knowledge is shared. And that can be shared both domestically but also internationally, recognising we're all in this together. And what we're aiming to do is get to our HILT outputs there, which are shown on that slide, and within that 10-year time frame to meet the milestones that we have with our Commonwealth grant. And all of the CRCs are working, under similar time frames and time pressures to decarbonise different areas of the economy. And we're trying to all work together to make sure that this is all done synergistically and we're not overlapping with anyone. So these are our current research focus areas that have been pulled together based on the results of our quick start projects and also a number of focus groups that we did with our industry and research partners. Everything in yellow is funded now with a flagship 2 or 3 year project. The areas in lighter yellow are funded, but they're not, they're with smaller projects, not quite so long. And the areas in grey are areas that we're still working on to scope out projects. And I'll just mention that facilitating transformation program, which is not the technical area. It actually tends to be the hardest area to scope and make sure that you're really delivering value to industry. So it's taken us a little while longer to get that portfolio really up and running, but now we think our portfolio, which has a mix of trade and export related projects, green certification related projects, policy related projects, and also this new project we have on enabling energy infrastructure is really, really exciting. There's still more work we want to do there. But we're finding that it's another area where everyone can lean in. It's kind of like safety. It's not getting into commercial discussions or IP discussions, but they're hugely important topics that really need to be solved so that decarbonisation can progress. And so just some of the research results that we've got coming in, which are exciting. The first box here on the left is talking about some of our research into pre-treatment that we can do to demonstrate that the lower quality ores that we have in the Pilbara, whereas the majority of our iron ore is coming from, can be suitable for green steel processes by removing some of the impurities. So we're getting some really great results from work here, and actually we have ARENA funding for one of these projects to expand it and take us hopefully all the way down the commercialisation pathway, which was really exciting to receive that grant from ARENA just last year. We're also looking at a number of other different direct reduced iron techniques using hydrogen, using flash reduction and fluidised beds. And typically we've had some materials issues with Australian ores using some of these methods. So we're looking at different ways that Australian ores can be made suitable for these methods, as well as smelting as a possible pathway for green steel from the lower quality Pilbara ores. We've got significant magnetite resources in Australia as well, which is easier to separate those impurities out, but we still need to know how we can use hydrogen and renewable energy in those plants. So a wide range of energy projects as well in our cross-cutting technology program. And then for alumina, while we can electrify alumina refineries, the energy demands to do so are very difficult. The integration of renewable energies into such high temperature steady state processes is also difficult, and any way to reduce the energy demands is extremely valuable. So we've got a large research project looking at next generation calcining techniques, ways to integrate thermal energy storage into alumina refineries, and also energy efficiency methods as well. So it's really exciting to see this whole portfolio come together and see how all of the projects link together, but also how our work is complementary to the other CRCs, and how that's working across all of the Australian government departments with all of their policy frameworks and initiatives ongoing, and then also how that ties into all of the work globally as well. And just lastly, as well as our research, we also do have an education and training component. To date, it's focused mainly on PhD students, but we are starting to move more into short courses for industry, and also master's courses and undergrad, and trying to encourage students to consider engineering and science and particularly metallurgy as a possible career pathway. And part of that involves internships, and here's a picture of one of our students, Renee O'Hara, who actually has completed an internship at Roy Hill, which is where Brian, who you'll hear from next, works. So that's all I had. Very happy to answer any questions. And of course, if anyone is interested in finding out more about HILT CRC or the CRC program, then just reach out, and we'll be happy to take you through that. Thanks, Alan.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenny. There are enormous synergies between the work and, in fact, even the structure of the HILT CRC and the Net Zero Industries mission. One of those common elements that drives that synergy is the knowledge and understanding that the problems facing heavy industry are not necessarily always unique to each industry. Those, as I said, high temperature issues that apply across, whether it be steel, cement, and in fact, in the case of Net Zero Industries, across the chemicals and refining industry as well, gives us great opportunities to actually leverage the synergies across sectors and to share the learnings and findings that may be applicable in one of those industries to a much wider international audience across multiple sectors. Now, moving on as we do, you may have noticed a bit of a pattern in how we've structured our speakers today. We've started with government. We've been moving through how government is helping coordinate, fund and sponsor collaboration between research, between industry and between technology providers. Next, for our next three speakers, we're actually going to be hearing from industry to actually see how their role is influenced and how their role is impactful, because they are absolutely critical, obviously, when we're talking about industrial decarbonisation, to have industry front and centre. First speaker of the three, can I please introduce Brian McDonald? Brian is the Technical Development Director at Roy Hill. That's an iron ore mining company in Western Australia. He also represents Roy Hill's involvement as a core partner in the HILT CRC that we've just heard from, and he chairs the steering committee which recommends the research projects to the CRC's board for approval, the list we just saw from Jenny. Brian, please, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alan, and just confirming you can hear me okay?
We can. Sorry, I muted myself.
Yeah, very good, very good. So yeah, look, you've had a lot of slides already. It is a pleasure to present to you this afternoon, but I will try and keep it sort of casual and informal and leave plenty of time for questions. But as Alan did a very nice segue there to industry, I'm part of my responsibilities at Roy Hill is in the area of technical marketing, looking at the value of ores in different processes, and also keeping an eye on evolving technology. And as mentioned by Alan and Jenny, I'm part of representing Roy Hill in the HILT CRC and chairing the steering committee, which reviews projects that go to the board. So you may not have heard of Roy Hill before. Roy Hill's majority owned by Hancock Prospecting. Hancock is a top 10 Australian company by earnings, and if you're not from Australia, I wonder how many of these brands you actually recognise, but we are hearing from a speaker from Woodside a little bit later on, just by the way, but very large, privately owned, family-owned company, very proud history in the Pilbara. And if you're not familiar with the Pilbara, there's a slide coming up to show where that is. Hancock's also a very big agricultural company. The chairman of our company also happens to be the most wealthy person in Australia, and is very generous with distributing her profits, and does quite a bit of philanthropy by the way. Right, so moving on, our iron ore portfolio of companies includes those shown in the top left there: Roy Hill, Atlas, Mulga Downs Project, and Hope Downs joint venture with Rio Tinto. Roy Hill itself produces around 64 million tonnes of iron ore per year. We load a Cape-size vessel of iron ore every day, about 200,000 tonnes per day. Leaves Port Hedland, so you can see the Pilbara, which you've heard many times, is this region up in the top left of Western Australia. And looking at the insert, Roy Hill mine is by rail 344 kilometres inland. Just a bit of personal flavour or context as to my own personal experience, and that might colour slides that come to follow. But my career started as a metallurgical engineer working for what was BHP Steel, now BlueScope Steel, on the east coast of Australia in the iron making department. So using iron ore, fines, lump, pellets and coking coal to make iron and steel. Following that, some time at over 20 years ago now at BHP's hot briquetted iron plant, where we were using natural gas and converting that into hydrogen and carbon monoxide to make DRI and HBI. And unfortunately, that plant was ahead of its time, really, in terms of technology and the market. Prices and a lot of technical issues prevented that plant from continuing to run. Following that, direct smelting, which the International Energy Agency's named direct smelting as a potential winner in the race to decarbonise by 2050. So direct smelting was using, I've just lost the lights in my room here. Direct smelting was using non-coking coal, injecting that into a hot metal bath to make a similar product to a blast furnace. Iron nuggets process, mixing non-coking coal and iron ore fines together in metallic iron. And after all that, sort of back to mining with Roy Hill, where we have a very beautiful beneficiation plant there, a wet high-intensity magnetic separation plant for increasing the grade of our iron ore, which of course is very essential if we want to make our Australian Pilbara ore suitable for technologies of the future. And yeah, all that experience, of course, has been, I've been happy to put that to good use in participating in the knowledge sharing that's part of the HILT CRC. So why is Roy Hill involved in the HILT CRC at all, you might ask? This slide is an attempt to help answer that question. In the 1970s and 1980s, there was actually a lot of effort in the steel industry to develop new technology. The focus wasn't so much on reducing carbon emissions, but it was on reducing emissions, dioxins, SOx, NOx from ciner plants and coke ovens, and also to reduce the dependence on coking coal and switching to coking coal. The industry was also concerned about rising impurities and producing higher grade products to feed electric arc furnaces. So a lot of those drivers are similar to where we are today. But despite tremendous efforts, and there's a long laundry list of technologies that were invested in on the right-hand side there, and I won't go through all of those, but non-coking coals in rotary kiln, rotary hearth, fluid bed, natural gas use in shaft and fluid bed reactors, many processes, many millions of dollars invested. And some of those processes are still alive today and showing good promise, but many have fallen by the wayside due to barriers, which were indicated there, low profitability of the steel industry. They just don't have the money to invest significantly in new technology, the high capital intensity of the industry, an aversion to risk, and a low tolerance for failure, and at the time scale required, very long time frames. And they're competing against the blast furnace, which has been around for hundreds of years. So industry hasn't been particularly successful in light of those barriers, and even though they've been motivated for other reasons to develop new technology, it's been really tough. So Roy Hill, largely for those reasons, was quite interested in HILT CRC, where we can bring together industry, government and academic partnerships all in one place in a collaborative ecosystem. So it's absolutely fantastic for sharing ideas, sharing a few, if I can say, war stories or success stories, sharing risks and just swapping ideas on how to do things better in the future. And because it's open to everyone and everyone can sort of lean in according to their capability, whether it's financial, knowledge, whatever, anyone can participate, not just the biggest players. So it is really good at giving a voice to everyone. And thirdly, but I think this is arguably one of the most important, Jenny mentioned in her presentation that role of interacting with government, regulatory makers, policy setting. The role of the HILT as a trusted voice to government and industry stakeholders is a really valuable one. So if you put yourselves in the shoes of say, a regulator, I think it's really valuable to have someone like HILT listening to the voice of industry and being able to put that through the filter of the research that's being done and translating that into messages that can be easily understood and trusted. So that's an important role. Just real quick, some of the projects of interest to us: iron ore beneficiation, direct reduction of Australian ores, and electric smelting. And I've just got a slide for each of these. Again, I'll go through quickly, but the beneficiation one, this is a research project that's looking at thermal pre-treatment of iron ore, grinding it very finely, and then leaching it using seawater that's been converted into a caustic solution. So very novel in industry, interesting, has potential to upgrade the quality of the iron ore from less than 60% iron to well above 60. Fluidized bed technology. I'll mention my own experience at hot briquetted iron plant. We had quite a lot of issues with stickiness of ores, and this particular project is digging into that to understand the fundamental contributors to sticking and how we can overcome those challenges. And then finally, electric smelting furnace technology, which has got the potential to use electricity to process Australian iron ores. And there's a chart on the left there showing the cost of producing steel based on desktop studies. And this electric smelting pathway, or DRI melter pathway, is relatively low cost for low-grade ores compared to the incumbent or alternative hydrogen DRI electric arc furnace technology. And finally, through Roy Hill's participation in the HILT, it has given us the opportunity to promote the HILT on an international stage. And most recently, there's a picture of me at a large conference in China, which was dealing with the topic of decarbonisation. It was quite interesting to see that China's getting very serious about this topic. So that's all from me. Thanks for your attention. Please post any questions on the chat, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Just one key point there. You'll notice a trend. I'm doing it for each speaker. One key point that came out and resonated for me there was the voice to government and regulators. And indeed, for Net Zero Industries, we recognise that one of the biggest values that we can actually add is to bring those different stakeholders together, to actually provide the voices so that each of the main stakeholder groups who work together for industrial decarbonisation, the people who need to work together to help industrial decarbonisation, actually have opportunities to share their problems and to be able to identify where they can help each other. Because no one person, no one company, no one country can solve industrial decarbonisation by themselves. So thank you very much, Brian. Our next speaker, I have a great pleasure to introduce you to Marcus Dorr. Marcus is the CEO and co-founder of, amongst many other companies, MCI Carbon, and that is an award-winning Australian clean energy platform around transforming CO2 emissions into building materials and other valuable industrial products for the circular economy. I should also call out that the MCI team were also the winners of the Australian Country Prize in the inaugural Net Zero Industries Award last year in 2023. Marcus, as always, a pleasure. Please, if you could turn your camera on and share your slides.
Okay, you can see me and hear me?
I can indeed. Brilliant.
Great, excellent. So welcome everybody, and it's a great privilege to be able to talk to the Emission Innovation series and the first of this seminar series. Look, MCI really is quite special in terms of climate technology. I mean, we've been going for 11 years now, funded by the federal government, the Australian federal government, and other governments, New South Wales government, but also industry. And significantly, we're a little bit ahead of many of the technologies in that it takes 20 years to develop a technology from lab, to get it into industrial scale for climate tech and for decarbonisation. And understanding that journey and understanding what's involved is really, something that we've all got to think about, how we can do that in a time frame that can meet our 2050, goals. And so what I really want to do here is give you a sense of what our mission is about and the technology. Indeed, how we're thinking about getting it to scale, which is really the challenge for all of us. And picking up on what Alan just said, there is no silver bullet. There's many different technologies required, and indeed our technology, can be suitable in many different circumstances, and I'll go into that. And most significantly, in awards as well, we're very privileged to win the #1 clean tech startup at Glasgow in 2021. Out of 2,700 companies, and that's a great privilege for us. We understand there are many great technologies out there, but very willingly accepted that one. So next screen. Look, creating decarbonisation pathways is really at the heart of what. Sorry,
you're not sharing your slides, Marcus.
Okay, how's that?
Still no slides.
Okay, hang on. Might just have to go back to sharing that again. How's that?
That's presenter mode.
Okay. How's that?
Still presenter mode.
Really? Okay.
I think if you go to display settings up the top there, you can switch. If you're doing two screens, you should be able to switch them.
Okay.
Maybe.
It was working before. How's that?
Yeah.
It was.
No.
Marcus, I can also share it if you want.
No, here we go. What about that? Is that sharing now?
It still looks like presenter mode.
Okay. And that?
Hasn't changed.
Frustrating. Okay, let me just stop this. Sorry about this.
Steffi has the backup if you'd like it.
Sure, I just don't know why I can't see it. All right. How about that?
Sorry, I shared right now. You can try it again, but
Okay. All right. Sorry, are you gonna? Did you want me to share it again?
I got it now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So next slide. Sorry. So creating the decarbonisation pathway. Sorry about that interference. For the hard to abates is really what we're focused on, and the solution we've really developed is in ex situ mineral carbonation. This is really transforming CO2 from various sources, from various concentrations into materials. And so this is via mineral carbonation. We take feedstocks that are either wastes like steel slags and bottom ashes, mine tailings, things like that, or indeed virgin material, quarried rock in different kinds of magnesium or calcium silicates typically. So next slide, please. So the kinds of materials we're producing from CO2 are typically the magnesium carbonates, calcium carbonates, and then a range of amorphous silicas or silica products that typically come from the types of materials we're reacting. And most significantly, this is about creating new materials that have much higher value than the actual process. And so our breakthrough really has been a techno-economic breakthrough with our technology over the last 11 years of federal government funding. Next slide, please. So what we've done is the first thing we had to do is to get the technology established to, what the current literature and what the world currently knew about mineral carbonation. Back in 2007, the IBCC report established that mineral carbonation had a big opportunity, but there was no global reference pilot plant. That's the call we picked up, and we built that plant. And from 2016 onwards, we've been running that plant doing techno-economic assessments of various pathways of mineral carbonation. So we have basically become kind of world experts in carbonating various forms of minerals under different conditions. And we have a very good piece of equipment there that has been funded for the first 10 years. Now we're operating that. Now Myrtle is really what we won the Mission Innovation Standing Award for, and Myrtle is under construction now. That's our demonstration plant, significantly that is a much larger scale. We'll be producing about 10,000 tonnes of carbon-embodied materials, and this is really important because we're addressing a demand signal out there in industry from cement, from manufacturing that wants carbon-embodied materials for to be put into products. Now, everyone's talking scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Consider after we've done that, or even along the way, we need to be embedding these materials, displacing high carbon intensity materials with low carbon intensity materials. That's what we're doing. So in terms of an opportunity for value and for carbon reduction, we not just capture and lock away, but we also displace. So that's a really good dividend on our technology in terms of its implementation. And that's what we're focused on. So the next scale plant are the industrial scale plants. So Myrtle, significantly, we're building one demonstrator and bringing campaigns for our customers who are emission customers like steel and cement customers, or indeed like our first customer, which is an Austrian company, RHI Magnesita, and they are a refractory, world's largest refractory producer. And what we're doing is basically working with them on getting rid of the last 30% of their carbon emissions through their process, and that's by capturing it and then keeping it in a cycle. So for us, the focus is on customers that really have the things that we need for a business model to work, and the business models are very important. Can I go to the next slide, please? So we really see ourselves as much as we're doing mineral carbonation. Actually, what we've built is a platform, because we have so many different sectors, different feedstocks, and different profitable pathways to meet demand in industry for manufacturing around carbon embodied materials. So really, by looking at the solution, the technology solution, in a very different way than just, we've developed the technology, we're really looking at how does that integrate into existing industry and also address the emissions now on the way to net zero. We can't just wait for all these technologies to be ready by 2040. Ours is a technology that we're scaling now to show that we can get rid of an amount of those emissions from industry, but importantly, try and make money on the way. And so the big thing for us is that our techno-economic breakthrough is to not just rely on a carbon price or not rely on a cost-based solution. And it's very, very exciting to be in this place. Next slide, please. So we've made a lot of breakthroughs, and we've done this in commercial and research secrecy. So we're talking about information sharing here, and we're quite happy to now start sharing information. But in the early days, and indeed up to where we've got our global position and a leading position in research, we couldn't publish because we needed to really get to a stage where we could commercialize something. We had enough IP to be defensible, but also to have enough know-how to be commercial. And so this is why, and being ahead of the curve, this is what we've done. So we've got some pretty significant kind of differentiators in what we're looking at. One is that we don't need a pure source of CO2, so we can actually take from industrial sources now. And that's pretty significant because our technology also reduces some unit operation requirements like scrubbing, and we do a lot of heat exchanging and recovery when we do an integration with a point source. We also create durable carbon credits, and we've got several methodologies now in development around the world. Significantly, we permanently lock it away. These are durable carbon credits that we'll be creating. So actually, we'll be like a producer of carbon credits, a factory that produces carbon credits, but not relying on that. That's really cream on top for us. Environmentally favourable is absolutely kind of one of the hallmarks of our technology, and that is through our whole process. At the end, there is a zero waste pathway. We have a pathway for all the materials that go through that we're processing and testing. And that's really significant to the extent that we can be put onto the end of a waste to energy, for example, and get rid of even the last bit of waste. So we're very significant to in a lot of different sectors, not just for the carbon capture and the abatement, but actually into the material development. That's really significant for us. We also, we've brought the public, the Australian public and also the global public along with our technology development. We are a carbon capture and utilization technology. And the public, the world really loves the idea of actually transforming the carbon and CO2 emissions into valuable materials, and actually doing something with it. You can touch it, you can feel it. Our carbon brick, our low carbon cement, these products are all really, really significant, and also capture the minds of the public, which is really important to bring along with social license. I go to the next. So really, our model is to take a CO2 source, take a feedstock, and then transform it into whatever local markets, or indeed the highest value materials for markets that we can find. And so the actual market for this, the addressable market, and in fact where demand is coming from, was established several years ago by in one of the first reports that showed there was a multi-trillion-dollar market. This is just in the US for materials, getting the cement industry its footprint down, in its cement formulations, and also right across manufacturing. And so this is also a kind of a starter gun for us to show, and moving towards a demand is really what we're focused. Next, please. So this is our global reference pilot plant. We run this every day. We run up to 2 shifts. We're doing multiple programs of work with multiple customers around the world. It's amazing how much demand there is. However, not all materials, not all feedstocks are suitable. So we have an ability to rapidly screen and assess multiple materials from around the world to see whether they're good. You've got to cut out the time in the way in which we develop these technologies and roll them out. And we've become very, very good by putting innovation at the heart of what we do. Our actual technology was developed by the chemical engineering group in Orica, who was my first big investor. I'm the largest investor with my group from Canberra. This has been going 17 years from inception, and we've got the latest investors we have are from Japan, 2 Japanese banks, Mizuho Bank and SMTB, and Itochu Corporation. But our next biggest investor is our first customer, which is significant, RHI Magnesita from Austria. And this is why in Mission Innovation with Austria and Australia, we are kind of a flagship project here, because we are actually in design for a 50,000 tonne plant up in Hochfilzen, or in the vicinity in Austria. And that's significant, getting your first customer for a major technology like this. Can I go to the next slide, please? Our proud babies under construction and about to start commissioning. This is alongside an ammonia plant in Newcastle, Australia. That's Orica, who already capture their CO2 as part of their process. We take a feed of that, and then we process this doing campaigns. This will be finished and running by the end of the year for our first customer, RHI, and then all the other customers who are now lining up for campaigns. Very, very exciting. Very proud of this flagship. We just received another Australian federal government grant, signed it last week, which was a carbon captures technology grant. The Australian government's been very good at providing grants, throughout our journey, and we had to apply for those individually on their own merit. They've been peer reviewed. However, as I said, our technology, we do not publish all our technology, we certainly want to help, and we use our technology to help some of the other future battery technologies, and also with the SmartCrete, which is our smart concrete and cement program, which is a CRC, which was talked about before by Jenny. We're very happy with the progress of this so far, and next year we'll see a lot of advances and also announcements. Next slide, please.
If I could, just 1 minute, please, Marcus.
Yep.
Thank you. No, sorry, I don't want to speak. If you could wrap up within 1 minute, please.
I will.
For our
Sure.
next speaker.
Okay.
Thanks.
So just reiterating that, RHIM is an investor, an equity investor, and also our first customer. Go to the next slide. We're taking ore. They've already got established quarries for our materials there, which is significant, and that's also an enabler for rapid scaling for us. Next slide. And we've attracted world media, which is really important. We need to bring, as I said, for social license, for government advocacy and others, we need to bring everyone along and share information, share opportunities, share projects. Next slide. And team is everything. We're an awesome team. Love my people. Got about 50 people and growing by about 1 or 2 a week. And it's very, very exciting, having such a dedicated people who are on mission to roll our technology out to our customers. Last slide, I think. And couldn't do anything without our partners, advocates, investors, and customers. And we have a lot of those, moving forward, including the governments. So thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Marcus. That is truly inspiring technology that we hope to see far more of very quickly. In respect of time, and we are getting very close, our final speaker today is Yvette Manolis. Yvette is a senior leader at Woodside Energy, 20 years of experience spanning strategic technical leadership roles, and is currently, for Woodside Energy, their General Manager for Climate and Decarbonisation. Last on the agenda, but certainly not least, Yvette, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak today. I'd like to first just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today, which for myself is the Whadjuk Noongar people in Perth of Western Australia, and just extend my respects to all peoples who are joining us today. So look, I thought today I'd just give a quick summary on Woodside. People may not be familiar with Woodside, a little bit on our decarbonisation approach, and then some specific decarbonisation activities and projects that we are progressing. Obviously, our disclaimers are very important. And if you have a look, everything I'm talking about today is actually available via our Climate Action Transition Plan, which you can find on the Woodside website if you're looking for more information. Okay, so let me start with Woodside's climate strategy. So Woodside's climate strategy has a number of key components, but actually before I go into that, I should tell you who Woodside is. So Woodside is a global energy company. It's founded in Australia, and we provide reliable and affordable energy to help people lead better lives. And we recognise that the world needs energy that's affordable, reliable, and lower carbon. And one of our key roles is to help support a successful energy transition. And we recognise that the LNG in particular that we produce can help countries, especially in Asia, to decarbonise and also to maintain energy security. So as a part of that, our strategy is to thrive through the energy transition. And we have a number of targets. We have both Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3 targets, and you've heard people talk about both of those today. So just to quickly set the scene, we have a few targets. One is we have a 15% Scope 1 and 2 reduction by 2025. We have a 30% net equity target by 2030. And we have an aspiration for net zero by 2050. And these are all relative to a baseline, which is an average of 2016 to 2020. So it is against a fixed baseline. And we have 3 approaches we try to use, or that we use to achieve our Scope 1 and 2 emissions reduction targets. And these are based on good engineering principles. So the first one is we avoid the emissions in how we design our facilities. If we can't avoid them, or if the facilities are already in existence, we reduce the emissions in the way we operate. And then finally, for whatever we can't design out or operate out, we buy or originate carbon credits and use offsets for the remainder. Now, our priority definitely is to avoid and reduce emissions. And so one way we've done this is that all Woodside operated assets and projects have to have a decarbonisation plan to look at ways that they can technically reduce emissions at those facilities. And these decarbonisation plans are rolled up to enable all opportunities to be assessed for engineering and commercial viability. As I mentioned, we also use carbon offsets to reduce our emissions. Now, it's a little bit different to our Scope 3 approach. So our Scope 3 approach includes the introduction of new products and services in our portfolio, like hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. And these are products and services to help our customers avoid or reduce their Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are our Scope 3 emissions. And we have two Scope 3 targets. One is we're targeting final investment decision on new energy products and lower carbon services by 2030 with a total investment of $5 billion. And we're also targeting creating capacity of 5 million tonnes of CO2. Now, of course, these targets are subject to commercial feasibility and approvals, but that's our clear intent. And you can see in this little blue call-out box how we're currently tracking against those targets. So we're making good progress, and we're working closely, of course, with government that you've already heard from, our value chain customers, and with new technology and emerging businesses. So I wanted to talk a little bit about those. So if we first focus on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. So this chart here is showing how we approach our Scope 1 and 2 emissions journey. And I realise the text is probably a little bit small, but the key takeaway...
Sorry to interrupt, but I think, is it just me? But I almost just see the first slide.
Oh.
It's just you, Stephanie.
Oh my God, sorry.
So you should see a slide called Large Scale Abatement Approach.
It's working perfectly, Yvette.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And so what I'm really trying to show you on this slide is that we have designed out a large number of opportunities already in our existing facilities, but that's not enough to reduce our emissions. So we've actually already designed out around 16 million tonnes of carbon dioxide in our Scope 1 and 2 emissions that's cumulative, that's a figure, between now and 2050. So that's avoided emissions in some of our large projects. We then have on these decarbonisation plans identified a further 70 opportunities which could avoid approximately 12 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, and they're all targeted for completion between now and 2030. All that's worth about 1 million tonnes per year in the short term. And those opportunities have a total cost of around 200 million US. And then the final component here, which is the light blue component, is large-scale abatement opportunities. And we're assessing those separately, and I'll explain why. But they could potentially abate between now and 2050, 35 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. And these are significantly more expensive, which is why we've separated them out. And because they're more expensive, a key focus is maturing technology and reducing costs to help us feed into these decarbonisation decisions. So I bet you're wondering, what are these opportunities? So this slide here is showing just a subset or example of either the design out opportunities I spoke about. So that's the 16 million tonnes, or a selection of those 70 opportunities that we're targeting between now and 2030 to be implemented that will give us an extra 12 million tonnes. And what I really want you to see here is that there's quite a range of activities, but some of the more significant ones are things like lower carbon preparation to supply power to our Pluto LNG plant. We've done flare minimisation, including design changes, and also energy efficiency and reliability improvements. And this includes things like reducing power generation redundancy, which then, of course, reduces your emissions. And the way that we assess these in Woodside is that these opportunities, the 70 odd that I spoke about, generally have a cost around or less than $80 a tonne US. And I'm going to mention a few financial metrics because I think they're really important to help decision making within businesses. But one of the key points here is that this $80 a tonne US, which is escalated over time, is significantly more than the cost of buying a carbon credit or an Australian carbon credit unit, which is less than half of that, and that's to incentivise action within our business for these decarbonisation opportunities. Now, I next want to talk a little bit about these large-scale abatement opportunities, which was this 35 million tonnes potential abatement that I mentioned. Now, if you look at Woodside's operations, we do produce both oil and gas, but our LNG facilities are the majority source of our emissions. And they come from a variety of different sources, but around half of our emissions are from the mechanical turbines in the LNG plant. And so we're looking at multiple opportunities to help reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions from our portfolio. And these are things that would cost significantly more than $80 a tonne, like much more, multiples of that number. And we've got some of them listed here on the left-hand side, some of the examples that we're currently assessing. And the idea is to use existing technology, but then also to look at how we can include new technology opportunities to try and reduce the cost of those options. And that will enable us to choose the optimal mix. So work is currently in progress on all of these options for this Pluto LNG plant that you can see here. And what's really important to us is that we will be looking at all of these options. A number of them are actually fairly technically mature, but it's more the practicalities of the site, including them on a brownfields LNG plant, as well as that additional cost, which is very significant. So we're talking in the orders of billions of dollars and well in excess of $80 a tonne. Now, if all of these abatement opportunities can be realised, emissions from our current portfolio could be reduced by up to 95% from our starting base. So it's very significant. And that's why we think participating in webinars like this and learning from others and knowledge sharing is so important. So I want to share with you some of the technology examples that we are looking at the moment to help make these options more feasible and cost effective. So you can see some of the examples here, and you might notice some themes. So a couple of key areas we're looking at include firmed lower carbon power, as well as carbon capture and storage. And the reason that those two in particular are very key is because no matter which decarbonisation opportunity we look to pursue, all of them require power. And so we want firmed lower carbon power to enable those opportunities to progress on site. And then the reason we need carbon capture and storage is, again, no matter which opportunity you use, in all cases, you need to put the carbon somewhere. And so that's where carbon capture and storage comes into play, particularly at the scales of the emissions that we're talking about. Now, it's also important to recognise that there's different applications for different technologies. So I often get people saying to me, well, can't this particular technology solve all your problems? And an LNG plant is very complicated, as I'm sure many people on the call are aware, and we have lots of different types of LNG plants with different types of technologies, different ages, and so there isn't, unfortunately, one technology that suits all of our facilities, and that's why it's really important that we work with government, and we're having lots of discussions with industries to have a selection of a number of different technologies that can best suit the different application. So go to the next slide. These are some more of the different types of technologies that we're currently progressing and looking at. And some of these technologies are emerging, and they have the opportunity to supersede opportunities we're looking at in our current plans. And so we're working, as I mentioned, to try and mature these technologies with a number of partners. But given the audience and the focus of this call on industrial decarbonisation, I did want to call out just maybe one example. So this is just an example of many things that we're partnering on, but I've got here a box here, post-carbon capture. I'm on the far left-hand side. And Woodside's just funded, alongside a number of other organisations, a technology called KC8, which provides essential but yet hard to decarbonise industries such as steel, cement, power generation and chemical production with a lower cost, more energy efficient, smaller and lower potential environmental impact CO2 capture technology. And that's compared to what would be compared to like a normal or traditional carbon capture amine based process. As I mentioned, this is just one example of the many types of technologies we're looking at, but you can see that these are real technologies Woodside's investing in. A few people have also talked about the power of industry initiatives and collaboration. So I've just included here a number of different industry initiatives Woodside's joined to provide leadership and advocacy and to help sharing learnings with others and to make sure that our approach is consistent with global practices. And they cover a wide variety of areas across global organisations. And then one of the final things I thought was worth mentioning is, in addition to our plans to invest in new technology, lower carbon energy products and services, we're also working with our suppliers and customers to help them reduce their emissions. And one example of that is in methane. And so I wanted to give a very quick recap on methane for those who aren't aware of it, but methane emissions are the second largest contributor to carbon dioxide, second largest contributor to temperature increase, only after carbon dioxide, sorry. And it's well recognised as something that everyone can get after to reduce global emissions. It's also recognised in the Australian federal government future gas strategy to reduce venting and methane emissions, and Australia's one of the 155 countries that signed the Global Methane Pledge to reduce methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030. So some of the things that we are doing is, we're leading the Methane Guiding Principles Global Midstream Initiative, which is designed to support methane reductions across global value chain. So not just within our value chain, but we're working with 20 organisations globally who are reaching out to their own value chains to reduce methane emissions. Because we recognise that we still need to reduce our methane emissions in Woodside. However, we are significantly better than what's considered best practice for oil and gas, and we see that, similar to some of the other presenters that discussed their approach, we can see we can have a very large impact globally by helping others to reduce their methane emissions as well. So as a part of that, in Australia earlier this year, we hosted a complimentary methane masterclass to bring together global operators, customers, regulators, associations. We had the UN, the IEA, and a number of people come together to talk about the latest science, regulatory approaches and different initiatives. We're also part of large initiatives in Asia, like the ASEAN Methane Leadership Program to share methane learnings. And we also initiated a program via the Australian Climate Leaders Coalition to help look at end-to-end emissions in gas value chains. And all of that is in addition to collaborating in global research science studies. For example, we're a part of the UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory efforts to fill knowledge gaps in methane emissions. And so I just wanted to mention one last thing before I wrap up. And this was also spoken about by another speaker, but it's really just embedding climate into decision making and into company culture, and we've found that incredibly important. And I think the message starts from the top. Our CEO has been very clear at our investor briefing days that our climate strategy is our company strategy. And so we think engaging your employees, measuring outcomes rather than just activities, and making sure there's clarity on the vision is incredibly important. And we actually have an employee-led group in Woodside called WeCan, Woodside Employee Climate Awareness Network, that is employee-led. And we now have a 2-week forum aligned with COP to encourage all employees to get informed, take action on climate. And that includes external presentations direct from people like the IEA. So that was a very quick summary of Woodside. I know we're short on time, but I hope that I've given you a bit of a flavour about the types of activities we're doing to support decarbonisation in our own facilities, as well as with a number of our peers and others globally. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Yvette. As we pointed out, this is in our inaugural industry engagement seminar, and we have grossly underestimated the amount of time that we need to be able to share the insights from our speakers. So apologies that we have run over time. We don't really have time for any questions, but what we would like to offer is that we will actually go back, take the questions that we've actually received, pass them on to the speakers relatively, and hopefully we'll be able to send out an email summary of the questions we can answer to all of the people who've registered for the event. So in closing, if I could thank you all so much, speak to our speakers, to the organising team in Austria and Australia for helping making this possible, and for all of you in the audience that have actually joined us here today. It is truly appreciated that you've actually been part of the Mission Innovation journey, and we'd like to we'd actually like to thank you all for your contributions and welcome you to actually be involved more and more of our mission activities. 2 things to note: we have the Mission Innovation Award for 2024, which is currently in its closing stages. Applications for outstanding projects, female innovators and young talent close on the 1st of September. Please go to our website for details, and please stay watching for what is hopefully going to be a rather engaging and just as interesting as this webinar has been for me and others, as we share more insights from industries and countries around the world over the next 12 months. So wherever you are, enjoy your day, enjoy your evening, and thank you so much for attending here tonight.